In the bustling heart of our cities, where the rhythm of urban life beats its most vibrant tune, a silent player takes center stage: the parking lot. It is often overlooked, overshadowed by towering skyscrapers and bustling streets, yet it quietly shapes our communities, the economy, and even the way we move about. Welcome to the captivating world of parking, where each empty stall holds a tale of land use, economics, and the ever evolving dance between car and city. Hi, I'm Tej, and today's talk is about these spaces that balance on the fine line between convenience and consequence. And to speak about them is Tony Jordan, the president of the Parking Reform Network. Welcome to the
Hello.
podcast, Tony.
Hello. Thanks. That was a fantastic introduction.
The arguments about parking lots often center on finding the right balance between, car-based transportation and promoting more sustainable, efficient, and equitable urban development. Was that what inspired the creation of this nonprofit, or and what are the primary objectives?
Um, yes and no. I
Hmm.
learned about this topic. I think that you're right. It's invisible, right? So there's parking everywhere, and at least in the United States, we take it for granted. If you drive, of course, you want convenient parking. You don't want to pay for it
Absolutely.
because no one wants to pay for anything. Um,
Hmm.
and and I came across a book by Professor Donald Shoup from UCLA in
Hmm.
2010 randomly. I'm not an urban planner, and once I read it, it just it was I'm kind of interested in things that just random things, and I read this and I was very captivated by seeing the truth about these spaces that I had never realized how much they cost, how much space they take up, other impacts they have on transportation and housing. So I came, my probably my initial personal feeling was climate, right? Being concerned about climate change and reducing greenhouse gas emissions and how automobile infrastructure, not only driving the cars themselves, but just the sprawl and the inefficiencies of that, were impacted by this parking issue. And then when I realized the other impacts it had on traffic safety and roadway injuries and fatalities, and runoff water and all the other things, how and then particularly housing is really when it took off. Largely was that we started to have major housing crunches, and parking rules and regulations can play a big role in how housing is built and how expensive it is. So all these things kind of came together, and it seemed to me there was really a need for an organization and a movement in a way that focused on educating the public about this topic, and also working with partner organizations where parking is a hurdle to their work, and helping them to understand that, you know weighing in and supporting reforms for parking policy can make it more likely that their goals will be successful, that they can meet their goals successfully, or that their programs will have a larger impact.
Right. And when you say educate the people about parking reforms, do you go specifically to events or do you have events of your own? How do you go about advocating this?
All of yes, all of the above. So, I mean, there's been obvious online. Some of it is social media, or just articles, and letting people know. When I first started doing this, I started locally. I live in Portland, Oregon, so in the
Hmm.
United States. So I first, I reached out to Bicycle Advocate Group. And I
Hmm.
went and gave a talk to this group about, like, hey, did you know that this was in 2015 or 2016, like, hey, did you know how much parking cost, and how much space it takes up, and if we want protected bike lanes, or we want the kind of density that supports multimodal transit, we need to change these rules in Portland.
That's
um,
right. Yeah.
and they were so I've done that. I've gone to conferences. We throw happy hour events. We do our own events, and it's a lot of it is just modeling the messaging, I think, and working on what are the key points about this, and how do you talk about it, and building a community so that people feel emboldened to talk about it, because it's something that um, people think is nerdy or is politically charged. And I've actually found it's a lot easier to just give people the facts. Like, this costs a lot and it takes up a lot of space. Like, and once you start there, the conversation shifts.
Right, right. Everybody thinks about the cost first and then everything else falls. Now, in your team, do you have urban planners? Do you have people or architects or people who are in the field who are affected by this reform? Or do you
Abs-
as, yeah, sorry.
oh, no, no, absolutely. I mean, my founding board. So our founding board, our advisory board was a few practitioners, consultants, planners, and some academics. But my founding board of directors was largely consultants or urban planners, working in either regional planning authorities or for consulting firms. Our membership is has a large number of city staff, planning commissioners, so like appointed officials, some elected officials. So it's very much a matter. There are definitely a lot of people who are working on this on a day-to-day basis, who want to
Hmm.
know what the best practices are, and
Hmm.
who want help basically on how to message about it. And also, there's what I found was like, even in my city, which is considered very progressive on transportation, the staff were educated on the topic, but the public wasn't there. And so there's a matter of organizing. A lot of what I do is really, I believe we're filling this space of how do you get the public support? How do you organize partner organizations in a coalition and the public, who, once they understand this topic, to come and support it at city council meetings, or at on committees, or just in general among the in the community, to raise awareness and support for these policies, which, once again, no one wants to pay for things. It's not inherently popular, but if you can explain what the benefit is versus the cost, it is politically possible.
Right. Now, please make me understand as a layperson. If I have to improve upon urban transportation, obviously, then the car parking issue is solved. So it's either park cars, either, have a market for cars and have parking, or you have an urban transportation like, railroads, or you have public transportation buses, and that's how you reduce car parking cars. And so how do you, and help people envision this?
I Great question. I think that first, it's just the facts, right? Like, so the facts are, at least in the United States, um, in an urban environment, a parking space, depending on if it's a surface lot, right? If it's just a paved piece of thing, that might cost in the thousands of dollars per space. But once you're in cities, usually you're structuring parking in a garage, right? In either above or below ground structure. And those spaces in US dollars can be, $40,000 to $60,000 pretty easily per parking space. Which means that the rent for the office or apartment that includes that parking has to go up $400 to $600 a month. The space this takes up is, it's 300 to 400 square feet, so about 100 to 130 square meters, I think. I don't, and so the space it takes up is pretty significant. Two parking spaces is the size of a fairly sizable one bedroom or studio apartment. So there's really a geography, not geography, a geometry aspect of this, where, people. I actually had someone come to me the other day and say, I heard that Portland's street grid was made for a lot less people than we have now, and that's why we have city problems. And I was like, no, our street grid is fine. Our city can hold many, many more people. What we cannot hold is a person, and then this 400 square foot space for their car. And then not only do they need it at their home, they need it at the grocery store, they need it at the library, they need it everywhere they go, because a parking space by itself does no good. So once so the key part is understanding those facts. And then I think people inherently understand, but you can help them to explain that, these cars are traffic, right? A parking garage is like a battery for traffic every day. It stores traffic up, and then it sets it out on the street. So if you want your streets to work better, if you want to have room for rail, if you want to have room for buses or bike lanes, you have to reduce that traffic somehow. And I tell people, is your city have enough traffic as it is? Like, is the traffic, do you want more traffic? No one, of course, wants more. No one says, oh yeah, we need more traffic. But I say the amount of parking that you have right now supports that amount of traffic. It's just an inherent fact, right? The traffic exists. The cars are going somewhere. If you add more parking, you are asking for more cars to come in. You're asking for that traffic, that rush hour to last longer and to be more congested when it happens. So the only way, if you have a goal to reduce drive alone mode share, if you have a goal to reduce, any like the number of miles traveled, the only way to support those goals is to discourage and it certainly not require large amounts of parking, because for 60 years in the United States, we have required arbitrary amounts of car parking for every land use. And so it's just like this cycle that has caused a lot of problems. And the first step is like, stop digging the hole deeper, like stop making it worse. And then we can look at, how do we add more transit in this area, or how do we make it more walkable? But right now we're just locking people into the car dependency.
Right. Now, if someone were to buy that argument, saying, we understand the climate, effects that is happening, we understand why we need parking, whatever it is. When you speak about why you need to have cars in the first place, right? Why can't you have communities which have, within a walking distance, you have grocery stores or hospitals or schools or whatever else? Now, that is a huge change. It's not something that is going to happen overnight. It's not something that is going to happen in the next 5 years, maybe. But where do you see this beginning?
I mean, I think that incrementally it starts the second that you allow a different form of development, right? I mean, right now, I mean, these ratios, these things I mentioned. So there's these things called parking minimum requirements or standards, the ratios, and what they are very specific amounts of parking. If you want to open a taxidermy shop, right, to stuff dead animals in Dallas, Texas, there is a specific number of it's like one parking space for every 400 square feet. I don't know if that's exactly it, but it's something like that. And if you want to open an electronics repair shop, there's a different ratio. If you want to open a coffee shop, there is a different ratio. And sometimes these are based on square footage. Sometimes they're based on very random things like the number of chairs in a barber shop. There are parking requirements for drive-in movie theaters, right? Why you don't need a parking requirement for a drive-in movie theater. Bowling alleys, like I will look at a city and look at all of the cities around it, and you will find within 10 miles, one city requires 2 spaces per lane in a bowling alley. The next one 3, the next one 4, the next one 5, the next one 6. Like they're completely arbitrary. So these ratios, like anytime you're building anything, it's either increasing the cost of building it because you have to go to city council and ask for a reduction in these, or a delay, or you're actually building the parking, which then means that you can't put buildings close together, right? Like, so if you want a walkable city and at 1 to 300 square feet, which is a random 1 to 100 meters, probably a pretty common ratio for a commercial building parking requirement, the parking lot will be as big as the building, right? Like, because if your parking space takes up 300 square feet, 3 to 400 square feet, and you're requiring one space for every 300 square feet of the building, then the lot will be as big. So if you imagine, if that's your base requirement, the maximum building density in a new development is half, right? Like half of everything is going to be a parking lot. So if you want to walk from, even if you do take the bus and you want to go to the barber shop, and then you want to go to the nail salon, and then you want to go get a cup of coffee, you're going to have to walk twice as far between every one of those businesses in order to, or it's going to be, and that's why we ended up with kind of suburban, like strip mall architecture, because then developers could concentrate a few businesses and have a big parking lot, which does make it kind of easier to move along, but those are harder to get to from, like, they're not in neighborhoods, and they're hostile to pedestrian or transit modes.
Mm-hmm.
So like, so in fact, this is one of the easiest ways to show this is many cities use parking requirements for bars, right? Alcohol drinking establishments, which is perverse because you're requiring, you know, parking for someone to go drink and then drive. But they have, usually, if you look at the city zoning code, a bar requires more parking than a regular restaurant. And part of the reason that is that cities use these requirements in order to prevent and discourage a bunch of bars from being in a row, right? Like, because if you have larger parking requirements, you can't put
Oh,
more bars on one block. So like,
correct.
it's really, once you start seeing how these are used, it's really shocking. So I think, to go back to your question, like, once you get rid of these requirements, the city is the same today as it was the day before. Like, if I
Mm-hmm.
have a shopping center, if I have a parking space at home and I drive to a shopping center and that's what I like to
Mm-hmm.
do, I can still do that. But what it does mean is that in the next year, when whatever gets built, some percentage of that can be built closer together, or can be built oriented towards a different mode, or can be have more of a mixed use aspect that then starts to slowly, incrementally, repair our cities and prove the demand for that kind of living, which then hopefully, the city needs to invest, and maybe you have a tipping point at some point where, like, then you really start to see a rapid redevelopment. But it is, like, I don't know, you know I have to work on this, because I know that, like, this is an integral problem to repairing cities, but it's not the solution. Like, it doesn't solve it. It's just like, we can't fix our cities if these rules stay in place as they are. So like, the step one is just,
Mm-hmm.
like, you're stacking the deck against a walkable city by maintaining the existing parking rules.
Right. Let's take a break to understand what Chezuba is. Everyone at some point ponders on how this beautiful life can be made more meaningful. Maybe you're a leader trying to enhance your employees' experience at your organization. Or you already work for the community and seek volunteers with state of the art skills to strengthen your nonprofit. Whatever your situation, know that you can make a difference. Chezuba began with this very vision, a vision to facilitate every skill and every passion in the world in meeting a social need. Corporate volunteering has several benefits for both businesses and organizations. In parallel, experienced and enthusiastic volunteers join NGO workers, enabling them to serve the community more effectively. Chezuba offers everyone looking to add purpose and meaning to their lives a chance to connect or volunteer virtually with nonprofit organizations from over 100 countries around the world. Visit www.chezuba.net and explore opportunities to find meaning. Chezuba, your platform to do good. And now, back with our guest. I see your point there, and very interesting observations. And I really didn't think about these statistics earlier, but now you've got this study sort of thing happening. Two questions to that.
Yeah.
A, did you do you think that today's city, the way it is planned, has been foreseen by planners 10 years ago, 50 years ago, and that is why it is the way it is today? And part two of this question is, do you have a city that is like a model, and you say this is the ideal city, or this is the ideal situation that you should have?
Well, good questions. I think that, you know, you can't blame it all on planners. Obviously, Americans, at least, speaking for my country, Americans bought into the idea of the suburbs initially, and that was, I mean, you can read a bunch of books about why that happened. Some of it racism, right? Like, there's a lot of factors in what went on in how our cities changed from the 1940s and 50s to the 1970s and beyond, right? Um, and so some of that is planners, and I do think that we moved from, there's an organization called Strong Towns in the United that talks about, like, and one of the things they talk about is kind of like allowing for incremental and organic growth, right? So I do think we moved away at some point from things happening naturally to like being kind of more master planned, and that doesn't always work out, right? We like to plan transit projects around big rail stations, right? Or big transit projects, which then require a lot of investment to build, the mixed use housing. So we've segmented through zoning. We said, used to be, you could have corner stores and small businesses embedded in neighborhoods, and in starting in the 50s and 60s, cities started saying, no, you can't do that anymore. And so I do think that plays a role in it, in how we ended up, commercial stuff here and residential there, and then you have to drive in between. um as far as cities that, like, I mean, I think if you go to any big city that existed before the automobile, where, Chicago or New York, there are, or Boston, there, or European cities, which often, one of the things European cities did was they became very car centric in a lot of ways, or they still accommodate a lot of cars, but in the 40 years ago, they started building a lot of peripheral parking lots, and they preserved their city centers. So that a lot of those cities that are the city center that is nice to walk in, it's because they invested 40 years ago in a bunch of, park once and walk in, and they do have, better regional transportation and
Mm-hmm.
transportation often. But I think you can look at any place, I think rather than saying like what city's doing it right, just look in your own city's backyard and look at the places that existed before cars were here, and that's where everyone wants to go. Like, that's the main street where everyone wants to be. Those are the communities that have, and people, they think that that one of the arguments is, it doesn't make it cheaper to live in these places because it's so expensive to live in these centers. But it's more just that there's more demand than we allow supply. We don't allow those places to be built. So I think that you don't need. I mean, obviously, go visit a big city if you've never been to one, and understand the value of having commerce mixed in with commercial, and having, enough people that support transit. But also just think about the parts of your own where you live, where you like to be, and wonder why, what makes that work. It's probably not a parking lot, right? Like, I mean, maybe it is, but it's probably not. It's not because there's parking there. It's because there's things to do, and because things are close together. That's why, that's what people like. So I think, um, I would encourage people to focus less about, where to look for a model. We know it's natural. We know how to do this. People have been building cities, for 1,000 years before we started screwing it up.
Yeah. So basically, it's you customize it based on the needs that of that city. And do you have a sort of parameters? Do you have a list of a checklist of, say, these things need to be taken care of, and this is what can be done? Have you worked on that kind of a study also?
Well, I mean, there are some basic parking reforms. So the first one is get rid of your parking mandates. Stop requiring these arbitrary amounts of parking to be built. A developer will, okay, and then the part two is the city needs to manage its own parking. The cities own a massive amount of curb space, and it's usually very undermanaged. It's just either completely unmanaged, where it's free for all, it's free to park there, there's no enforcement, um, or when it is priced, it's usually some arbitrary no low number that goes from pretty random hours. Like, it's pretty common for a city to stop charging parking before the dinner rush, right? Like, why? Like, that's when everyone's coming to the main street and you stop charging. So cities should charge where they should manage their curb space, mind their business, look at the curb, and if there are more people that want to park there, then they're either due to business or residential pressure, use permits and meters, use parking management practices and pricing in order to, um, give people the opportunity to park, right? You want to increase access. You want to make sure there is available parking for people who need to park there, but that's not free, right? That's nothing in life is free. So somehow you have to manage it. If the city's doing that, then the businesses and landlords and developers and their customers and tenants will all have the information they need to know, how much parking do I need to build? Like, we don't tell a coffee shop owner, you need to have good customer service. You need to have 3 baristas on. service on staff, every hour. No, like we let a coffee shop figure
Mm,
out for itself what it wants to do, but we do tell
right.
them how many parking spaces they need. Then finally, it's very important to reinvest money you're getting from parking revenue into the community. Ideally, you want to show people that you're not just charging to raise money, right? It's you can invest that money
Hmm.
either to, to make it more to improve the commercial attractiveness,
Technology.
right?
Hmm.
Well, also like like you can make it so that the sidewalks and lighting are nicer, which helps a business district, right? Because businesses say, "Oh, you're going to charge my customers," but it's like, no, we're going to make this a nicer place. Or you can pay for bus passes for people, or you can add crosswalks. You can even just give the money back to people as a dividend so that people who park more pay more and people who drive less get a little bit extra money in their pocket, right? There's many schemes, but the
Right,
key is
right.
like reinvest that money in a way that shows the public that it's not just a cash grab for the city. So those are the three like main tenets: get rid of your mandates, charge for parking, and reinvest the money in stuff that's good for your city's goals. And if you do that, you're on the way.
Absolutely. Very well thought out. Now, is there something that is coming up? Is there an event that you're excited about? Would you like to announce something on this podcast?
Let me think. Let's see. I don't know. I mean, we've grown in the last year tremendously. We've added a bunch of new board members. So we're always just encouraging people to who, if this is an issue that you care about, to just you know become a member and join. We're going around. I don't know if we have anything. There's a few happy hours here and there. There's like a happy hour in Washington D.C. next month and things, but I don't know if we have any huge events this year. We hired our first staff person this year, and we're working towards probably next year doing something that is along the lines of a parking gathering for the people who are into this. But I think the main thing would be get on our mailing list so you can see what events we're attending or where we have members attending, and see what we're doing next. I mean, we're really just trying to you know keep ahead
Yeah,
and find
bring
out what's going
this.
on. And
Yeah,
yeah. And if you're in a city that is doing parking reform, we want to know, if we don't know already, we want to know that you're working with your city council or you're proposing something, because we can't help you if we don't know that you're doing this. Don't do it alone. It's more fun as a group.
absolutely. Yes, wonderful. Well, I think, Tony, it was lovely talking to you. I got some insights that I never thought about earlier. I always thought, parking is a difficult thing to balance in terms of distance, in terms of space, in terms of connectivity, everything. So this is a new angle that I'm looking at today.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
once you hear it, it's sometimes, I mean, it caught me. All right.
Yeah,
I read this book and I changed my whole life. I think it's really something that can have a big impact, and more people need to know about. So thank you so much for sharing uh, our story.
my pleasure entirely. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us.
Yeah.
From influencing our transportation choices to shaping our cities, these spaces play a pivotal role in the way we live and move. As we continue to navigate the challenges of urbanization, sustainability, and equitable access, the story of parking lots remains an important narrative in the ongoing saga of our evolving cities. Thank you, and see you in the next episode.